liste aussi tous les grands arceaux, ils ont transformé, ils ont déformé une réalité. Parce que du point de vue phénoménologique, un maître sont venus, des chefs d'orchestre, mais des compositeurs aussi, donc c'était quelque chose de théorique très important. Il disait, tu es très sensible, je ne sais pas quoi encore, 2, 3 qualités, mais tu comprends rien, tu viens avec moi, je te donne une bourse atière pour t'aider. J'ai cru, c'est vraiment quelqu'un, c'est vraiment criminel. Donc,
c'est un escroc, il veut m'acheter.
Donc il me donne comme ça, mais parce que l'impression générale c'était que finalement, voilà, parmi les Romains, quelqu'un, un génie, qui peuvent dialoguer comme ça, et même qui peuvent insulter. C'était
avec des arguments.
Avec des arguments théoriques.
C'est que toi, tu avais des arguments.
Que lui aussi acceptait, donc comme ça. Bon, finalement, j'arrive à Trier, j'ai compris que c'est complètement autre chose. Parce que c'est ça très important, la musique.
Mot à mot.
Yes. I think a précis might be called for. I could pick it up halfway through.
Yes, no problem.
Why do you ask?
Non, c'est important.
Bon, on continue.
Est-ce que c'est un progrès d'aller voir à l'intérieur?
Voilà.
C'est là la question générale.
C'est ça. Donc.
Oui,
est-ce que c'est un progrès?
Est-ce que c'est un progrès? Ça,
c'est un progrès technique, un progrès.
Et le fait qu'on rentre dans le son, pour vous, c'est un progrès?
Oui, parce qu'on entend quelque chose, c'est la richesse.
Ça permet l'avènement d'une autre réalité qui devient spirituelle, qui devient vécue, qui peut permettre.
On peut même dire.
So do I.
Much less to translate than
I think
Il entendait, il jouait avec une autre manière, assez proche de Fischer par exemple, d'Edwin Fischer ou de Gieseking par exemple. On avait une élite c'était aussi le cas de Furtwängler pour le chef d'orchestre. Mais on avait aussi des gens comme ça très mécaniques. C'était aussi Scherchen qui voyait, qui entendait autre chose. Donc on avait des gens qui imaginaient quelque chose de plus, qui avaient des nécessités de plus.
Okay, I make a translation.
Mais c'est aussi, pour finir, c'est aussi une aventure de l'acoustique des salles. Non, je finis avec ça. L'acoustique des salles. Je ne sais pas si les salles de Berlin sont avec une acoustique traditionnelle, mais si on compare les salles à Vienne, ils sont avec un écho comme ça, un peu imprécis. Je ne sais pas si ça très beau, c'est riche, mais imprécis. Évidemment, les salles dans l'Allemagne de l'Ouest qui étaient détruites par les Américains, c'est autre chose, ce sont des salles modernes, on ne peut pas récupérer. Mais il y a aussi, il me semble, une aventure dans le domaine de l'acoustique des danseurs. Les Français sont avec... il y a aussi, on peut partager aussi des choses avec les, comment on peut dire, sur des régions géographiques. Les Allemands, ils aiment une musique comme ça, un peu couverte. Tubée. Par contre, les Français ont une nécessité d'une clarté, des couleurs, des timbres tout à fait spéciaux.
Précis.
Les Anglais sont peut-être les privilégiés d'après moi.
Les plus équilibrés.
Ils ont aussi...
Yeah, because everything in England is imported. Anything any good.
Donc, je termine pour
Okay.
Like the wine. Yeah. This is a long discussion, essentially about Western art music and how the way of hearing it has changed, how the way of playing it has changed, how the sense of the acoustics of the spaces in which it's performed has changed. And Janku has particular personal experience of this because of his encounter with Celi Vidaki, who was a very great Romanian conductor who studied phenomenology and applied phenomenology to his work as a conductor, and therefore started to try to take into account every factor that was present in a moment of performance. Celi Vidaki made these sort of statements like he would rehearse a symphony for a week, and then he would go up on the first concert, he would go up on the podium to conduct the orchestra, and he would have a completely empty mind. And he would, for this reason, he would be able to take in like the entire circumstance of like the whole of the sound of the room. He would be totally aware of that. So in other words, he would not have a kind of rigid, mechanical, textual approach, although he would say that his approach was really what the text really demanded, of course. But particularly on the metronome markings, he would be perhaps departing from the text. Possibly those metronome markings would have been put in by a later editor anyway. But he would say, well, the speed at which you conduct a piece must be to do with the resonances of the building that you're playing it in. So if you've got a dry building, you're going to go faster. If you've got a building with a big sound, you're going to play the first note and you're going to listen to it. You're going to think, yes, and then your hand is going to come down slower for the next beat. You know, so you're really dealing with everything. And then he was working very closely with the sound production of the instruments, with the exact way the bows were held and so on. So there are a lot of complex tendencies and counter-tendencies in the way in which this repertoire of classical music is being performed today, because there are still, because Janko, for example, talked about a Wagner version that he heard, which was like extremely kind of rigidly performed, and it didn't give this kind of endless, unified sound, which, you know, would seem, at least from my limited knowledge, to be what probably Tristan and Isolde would require, kind of timeless, sort of constant evolution of the sound. I mean, I think the question that you came to was that our contemporary ears have learnt how to go into the sound in greater detail, to go really into the sound, to get behind all the stuff that was maybe preventing us from doing that.
And to discover the details.
Yeah.
The details.
Yeah, it's always going to the detail of the sound and not stopping on the level of sort of narrative, musical narrative or phrases. All the things that to which musical value was exclusively attributed in the past. So we can really go in and we really hear it. We have that capacity. We can still turn that capacity off if we're invited to do that. You know. But that's generally our position. And Janko put the question, is this development, is this progress? Is this a progress? And that's...
Maybe, shall I, can I have 5 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about 2 things. First, a little historical point, and then a philosophical question for the composers based on that historical point. It's kind of related to what you said, this change in people's hearing. In 1953, Chelsea said that by the end of the century, people will be able to hear harmonics or partials. That's 1953. The first commercial publication of like overtone singing that had worldwide distribution was in the early 1960s. So 10 years after Chelsea said this. then by the end of the 60s, so that was the Tibetan music, Tibetan overtone singing. End of the 60s, we had Mongolian overtone singing published on records for the first time. 70s, we had the first recordings of Tuvan music, I believe, late 70s. We had the European overtone singers in the 70s. So the 60s was kind of the marking point where these recordings became available internationally. And it has grown rapidly, and now by the end of the century, overtone singing is common knowledge among a wide listenership. And I bring this up because I think Chelsea made this prediction right at the time when he was studying Hindu Tantra. And one of the important concepts of this Hindu Tantra was the idea of unity in plurality, the one in the many being inseparable. And one phrase that he used to describe this was the first movement of the immovable. And I'd like to ask you as composers whether this idea of the one in the many has any resonance with your own work as a spectral, or the idea of spectral music.
We're two musicologists. You're two musicologists.
Notre maître, s'il vous plaît, est-ce que vous avez quelque chose à dire?
Can you say some more about this notion of one in the many?
Yes, in fact, it kind of contradicts what you
Because
said.
the thing
About
I use, but
Tuvans.
maybe that's not the same.
Exactly.
Yes.
Tuvans are anti-Schopenhauer. See, this idea of Chelsea is so close to how Schopenhauer used Kant. And of course, Schopenhauer, was a huge impact on Wagner. And
Not vice versa.
Schopenhauer's up on the shot.
Fortunately.
Yuck, yuck, yuck.
I mean, yeah, Schopenhauer sort of was the first kind of New Age. No, I mean, Schopenhauer said, okay. I mean, Kant had this kind of breakthrough that basically we construct the world that we experience and the world that we have knowledge of, and we cannot have any direct knowledge or sensibility of what is beyond that. There must be something beyond it, which kind of produces it and sends it towards us, but we can't have any knowledge of that. And Schopenhauer was delighted with that situation, with that impossibility, and said, yes, this is the noumena, this is the one which is behind the many. And music can release that. Music is, the transcendent art. Music is the part of humanity that can rise above plurality and attain this state of oneness. And Wagner was totally into that. And of course, the fantastic thing is that when you go into a culture which is like anti-unity culture, like Tuva, the sacred is always opened up in a way that is multiple. Because Tuvans, they're completely unmonotheistic.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have a kind of God idea.
It's a multiplicity deduced from an unity anyway.
Yes.
It's completely deduced from
What is deduced from unity? Sorry.
Their multiplicity.
Well, they wouldn't see it that way. They
wouldn't probably.
They would see the sacred as being kind of more plural.
That's a question for composers. I think it's too much musicological approach. I don't know if you size what I want to say.
Well, maybe I could say one other comment about this. The idea of the bitone, or hearing two pitches simultaneously, when they're emitted from the same source, I think they are more integrated.
What do you mean? I mean, see, you hear that way because you're getting to be more accurate about the way the shit is, man. I mean, you don't. It's one thing if you got a composer making this stuff up, but the fact is that when you blow a horn and you teach somebody to hear the harmonics, there's no spiritual revelation involved in it. There's no concepts involved in it. It's just an accurate way of hearing what exists.
Yeah.
And pleasure, pure
Yeah,
pleasure.
I mean, it's just there. You're just showing folk, hey, dig, this is here. Now, we didn't focus on it before for various and sundry reasons, but check it out. You know, you don't have to, I mean, I love all that stuff. Believe me, I dig all that, but it is not necessary.
But
It's fun, but not necessary.
let's just talk about the physiological aspect. I mean, when
Yeah.
we hear 100